If I told you the foundation of everything you think you know about Western civilization didn't start with the Greeks or the Romans, but with forgotten kings, temple scribes, and desert empires buried in the sands of time, that from Sumerian city-states to the mighty Persian Empire, a whirlwind tour through thousands of years of ancient brilliance is actually where it all began? If so, then today's review just might be for you. Today, I'm reviewing the Great Course's course, Origins of Great Ancient Civilizations by Kenneth W. Harl. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and today I'm diving into another lecture series from the Great Courses. I've been reviewing many of these lately because I'm building a second YouTube channel, History Unraveled with Dr. Duncan, which features long-form scripted history content for anyone who missed lecture today or just wants a deep dive into the past. And so to prep for that, I'm watching a lot of these courses as research, and some of them are too good not to share with my bookish friends. As a reminder, these videos are much longer than my other videos because I try to give many more details in preparation for writing my scripts, as well as some argumentative distinctions, as well as my personal reaction, and above all, let those know who this series is for and who this series is not for. But before I do any of that, let's start with the lecturer himself, because the professor, Dr. Kenneth W. Harl, is a longtime professor of classical and Byzantine history at Tulane University in New Orleans, where he has taught since 1978. He received his undergraduate degree from Trinity College and went on to complete both his MA and Ph.D. at Yale University. Dr. Harl is an expert in the civilizations of the ancient Mediterranean, especially Greece, Rome, and Byzantium. But he is also an expert in the ancient Near East. He is a noted authority on ancient coinage and has published widely on the field, including civic coins and civic politics of the Roman East from 180 to 275 AD, and another book, Coinage in the Roman Economy, 300 BC to 700 AD. His archaeological work has focused especially on Asia Minor in modern-day Turkey. It helps that is where coins were first created. He is a highly respected teacher. He has been honored with Tulane University's Student Award for Excellence 9 times. He has also received national recognition through Baylor University's prestigious Robert Foster Cherry Award for Great Teachers. And in addition to his teaching and research, he has served on the editorial boards of both the American Journal of Archaeology and the American Journal of Numismatics. So let me give you the scope of this course. This course takes a look at the civilizations of the ancient Near East, spanning from the Bronze Age, which is about 3500 BCE to 1000 BCE, to the early Iron Age, which is about 1100 BCE to 500 BCE. They were largely unknown to modern scholars until archaeological discoveries in the late 19th century brought them to light. Previously mentioned only in passing and often inaccurately in biblical text, these societies once seemed distant and obscure compared to the more familiar worlds of Greece and Rome. Yet modern research has revealed their deep and lasting impact on Western civilization. This course surveys the major accomplishments of these foundational cultures, beginning with the emergence of urban life in Sumer and ending with the vast imperial reach of Achaemenid Persia. The first half of this course explores how early urban civilizations arose in the fertile river valleys of the Tigris-Euphrates, Nile, and Indus. While all three regions built upon early Neolithic foundations, each marked a dramatic shift in social, political, and technological complexity. The Sumerians and Egyptians left behind extensive written records, allowing us to trace the development of cities and centralized power and religious thought. In contrast, the writing system of the Indus Valley remains undeciphered, leaving much of that civilization shrouded in mystery. These early societies laid the groundwork for more complex empires that would come to dominate the Near East. The latter part of the course focuses on the rise and fall of major empires during the late Bronze Age and early Iron Age. This includes the expansion of the Egyptian and Hittite power, as well as the growth of bureaucratic states and the cultural reach of Mesopotamia into the Aegean after the widespread collapse of those systems around 1200 BCE, as new powers emerged, most notably the Assyrians, the Neo-Babylonians, and the Persians, all who forged more centralized and enduring empires. The Phoenicians and Arameans revitalized commerce and writing, while the Hebrews shaped the moral and religious traditions that would later define Western thought. And of course, in the culmination of this series, we take a look at the reign of Darius or Darius the First. I've heard it both ways. I should probably look up which one is considered more accurate. And it marks the culmination of this ancient era by uniting much of the known world under Persian rule, just as new tensions with Greece foreshadowed the next great chapter in world history, which of course will require you to pick up a subsequent series to take a look at that next stage of Western civilization. So let me give you a breakdown of each of these lectures. There's only 12 of them. They're impressive. They're incredibly well done, and there's a lot in each of them. And so let me give you at least a few sentences on each of these 12 lectures. First one, Cradles of Civilization. This lecture introduces the concept of civilization by exploring why certain river valleys, like those of the Nile and the Tigris, Euphrates, and the Indus, as I've mentioned already, gave rise to the earliest complex societies. It also discusses the characteristics of civilization, such as urbanization and writing, centralized authority, and monumental architecture. And you can check out my video on my other channel that goes into much more detail about that. And it does all this while emphasizing the environmental and agricultural preconditions necessary for large populations and state formation. Lecture number 2, First Cities of Sumer. This lecture actually covers the emergence of city-states in Sumer, especially Uruk, one of the world's first true cities. It describes early urban planning and temple complexes like the ziggurat and the development of cuneiform writing. And the focus in this lecture is on how religion and the economy, particularly temple economies, structured Sumerian society with scribes and priests all holding significant power. Lecture number 3, Mesopotamian Kings and Scribes. This lecture explores the political structure of early Mesopotamian cities, emphasizing the role of kingship as divinely sanctioned. It also discusses how scribes and the invention of writing enabled bureaucracies and legal systems. Case studies include myths such as the Epic of Gilgamesh and historical kings like Sargon of Akkad. Lecture number 4, Hammurabi's Babylon, focuses on the old Babylonian Empire. This lecture centers on King Hammurabi and his famous law code. The lecture contextualizes the Code of Hammurabi within Mesopotamian legal traditions and highlights how it reflects issues of social class and gender and retributive justice. Babylon's role as a political, cultural capital is also discussed in fair detail. Then we turn to the Nile. In Lecture 5, Egypt in the Pyramid Age, this lecture takes a look at the Egyptian Old Kingdom and its centralized monarchy. It explains how pharaohs leveraged religious ideology to legitimize their authority and organize massive labor forces for pyramid construction. The Nile's predictability, the divine kingship model, and the stability of the Old Kingdom are all key themes of this lecture. Lecture number 6, the Middle Kingdom, takes a look at Egypt's Middle Kingdom, and it is portrayed as a period of political consolidation after a time of chaos. The lecture explores changes in royal ideology, such as portraying the king as a shepherd rather than a god, as well as administrative reforms and cultural flowering, including new literature, which are all highlighted in this lecture. Lecture 7, Imperial Egypt, covers the New Kingdom. This lecture shows Egypt at its territorial height. Military campaigns into Nubia and the Levant, the wealth of empire, and monumental architecture like temples at Karnak are discussed in this lecture. It also touches on some prominent figures like that of Akhenaten, who will become a significant religious reformer. Lecture 8, New Peoples of the Bronze Age. This lecture introduces groups such as the Hittites, the Minoans, and the Mycenaeans, and it examines how these cultures interacted with Egypt and Mesopotamia and contributed to the broader cosmopolitan world of the late Bronze Age. It also discusses trade, diplomacy, and warfare among these powers, which brings us to one of the most interesting lectures and one of the most fascinating moments in ancient history. And in Lecture 9, we have the collapse of the Bronze Age. If you would like to know more about this, you can check out some of my reviews on the Eric H. Klein books, 1177 and After 1177, which are linked here. So Lecture 9, here the focus shifts to the widespread societal collapse around 1200 BCE. Potential causes such as the Sea Peoples and internal rebellions, as well as economic breakdowns and climate change, are all explored in this lecture. And the lecture discusses the destruction of palace economies and how only a few states like Egypt survived, but in a weakened form. Lecture 10 takes on the rise of the Hebrews. Specifically, it is titled The Hebrews to Jews, and this lecture traces the transformation of a small tribal group into a people with a distinct religious identity. It covers the historical roots of Israel and the biblical tradition and their Babylonian exile, and how monotheism became central to Jewish identity. The lecture stresses the role of memory and scripture and law in Jewish endurance. Lecture 11, Imperial Assyria, is a survey of the rise and fall of Assyria. This lecture actually examines the brutal efficiency of the Assyrian military and administration. So topics include the deportation of conquered peoples and the use of propaganda and the construction of monumental cities like Nineveh. Assyria's eventual fall to a coalition of Medes and Babylonians is also addressed here, so you get a little bit of that Neo-Babylonian in this lecture. Lecture 12, the final lecture, discusses the Achaemenid Empire. It is the largest empire the world had yet seen. It focuses on figures like Cyrus the Great and Darius/Darius I. Again, I should probably look up how to say that, and the construction of Persepolis, as well as the empire's relative tolerance of different cultures and religions. It emphasizes administrative innovations like the satrapies and the royal road, both of which enabled effective control over such a vast territory. That's it. Those are the 12 lectures. As you can see, you cover a large time period, and there is a lot to discuss from each of those lectures. It's packed with information. I would say that there are also some argumentative distinctions worth pointing out. In these 12 lectures, there are quite a few things, some through lines, some that go from beginning to the end, and then some are just arguments that he makes essentially in the last lecture that I think really support his efforts at not just trying to tell the history of the Near East, but to make specific arguments about what you need to know, what you might misunderstand, and how it plays into the larger questions about Western civilization. So here are 6 argumentative distinctions that I highlighted from these 12 lectures. First and foremost, he argues that the ancient Near East was foundational to Western civilization. Professor Harl challenges the traditional view that Western civilization began with classical Greece and Rome. Instead, he argues that the earliest cultural, political, and technological foundations were laid by civilizations of the ancient Near East. So places like Sumer, Babylon, Egypt, Assyria, and Persia. These societies pioneer writing, law, kingship, religion, and imperial administration, all of which shaped later traditions in Europe and the Mediterranean. Another argument he makes is that civilization emerged first in river valleys due to environmental and agricultural factors. One of the central premises of the course is that intensive agriculture in river valleys, specifically the Tigris, Euphrates, the Nile, and the Indus, enabled the development of dense populations, economic specialization, and urban life. And so Professor Harl argues that the geography and ecology of these regions were critical in creating the conditions for the first literate state-based civilizations. He also argues, in that same vein, that trade and writing were interdependent catalysts of urban civilization. The professor stresses that long-distance trade, particularly in Sumer, was a driving force behind economic complexity and the invention of writing. And so the need to track transactions and manage surplus goods led to increasingly sophisticated record-keeping systems, culminating in the development of cuneiform and other scripts that enabled bureaucracy and literature and law. Another argument he makes is that empires in the late Bronze and early Iron Ages were built through cultural adaptation and integration. Rather than emphasizing pure conquest, Professor Harl shows that successful empires, such as those of the Hittites, the Egyptians, and later the Persians, depended on adopting and adapting and spreading Mesopotamian and Egyptian administrative as well as religious and literary traditions. And these empires were multicultural and managed diverse populations through flexible systems of governance and ideology. And then he argues that the collapse of the Bronze Age was a turning point comparable to the fall of Rome. Professor Harl draws a significant parallel between the collapse of late Bronze Age civilizations around 1200 BCE and the fall of the Western Roman Empire more than 1,000 years later. And he argues that this collapse disrupted trade, destroyed palace economies, and led to a cultural and political dark age, after which new societies like the Israelites and Phoenicians emerged and redefined the region. And then finally, and I think one of the most interesting arguments that he makes in this series mostly comes out in the final lecture. He argues that the Persian Empire represented the apex of Near Eastern civilization before the rise of Greece. In Professor Harl's view, the Achaemenid Persian Empire under Darius I represented the culmination of 3,500 years of Near Eastern development. It was the most administratively sophisticated, as well as culturally tolerant and geographically expansive empire to that date. However, Darius's expansion also marks a historical pivot point, as Persia's encounter with Greece set the stage for a shift towards the classical world, which is of course a whole nother series that you would have to pick up. Well, I'm sure you can find lots of series in the great courses that address the classical world, and of course starting with ancient Greece. So I would have to say, in summary, or I guess in reflection, that I genuinely enjoyed this series, The Origins of Great Ancient Civilizations. It is concise, it's just 12 lectures, and it is absolutely packed with insights. I think that Professor Harl is a seasoned historian, and his teaching style is both engaging and clear. He walks you through a huge swath of time, from the first cities of Sumer to the grandeur of the Persian Empire, all while highlighting the importance of these ancient civilizations to the larger story that we tell about world history, Western civilization, and even up to the present. Unlike many ancient history overviews that rush past the Near East to get to Greece and Rome, this course makes the case that everything from writing to law and religion and empire and even diplomacy had its roots in the Bronze and early Iron Age civilizations of the Near East. Which leads me to, who is this course for? Well, if you're a history lover who wants a solid and digestible introduction to the ancient Near East, then I think that this will serve you well. Also, if you've always wondered how things like writing and cities, law, and empire got their starts, this course lays the groundwork beautifully. Also, again, go check out my other channel, History Unraveled with Dr. Duncan. I have several videos that deal with that. I think that if you're a teacher or a student or a lifelong learner looking for a framework before diving into deeper or more specialized histories, this is a great launch pad. Or if you are a content creator that is trying to make more educational material for online, like myself, then I also think that this will serve you well. And if you have been intimidated by massive tomes or dusty textbooks, don't worry. I think that this series is well-paced, engaging, and accessible, and a great place to start. So who is this series not for? Well, I would say if you're looking for something a little more in depth, especially if you're looking for like archaeological details or long discussions of cultural minutiae, this series is definitely much more a very broad survey. Or if you only care about Greece or Rome or the European Middle Ages, you really might not appreciate the Eastern focus of this series. Or if you prefer flashy visuals or dramatic reenactments, this is not really going to appeal to you. That's going to be true of pretty much all of these. They are lecture-based. There are going to be some images, and that is if you watch it. If you just listen to it, then you won't even get that. But again, it is lecture-based series, so that's going to be the way that it is presented. I will say that it is a very broad introduction, and so many of these civilizations that he mentions and empires that he mentions, there are other much more detailed great courses that you could take a look at that go into more detail about them, especially the Egyptians, the Hebrews, probably the Babylonians and Assyrians. I know there's one on the Persians. All of them probably have some great courses material that you could consult. So if you want a little more detail, I'd recommend going there instead. I'd say overall, Origins of Great Ancient Civilizations is an excellent entry point into a world that can feel very removed from most history, especially Western civilization. But I also think that Professor Harl is a compelling guide with a gift for connecting the ancient with the modern. And he reminds us that our political institutions, as well as our religious traditions, and even stuff like our alphabet, that's something that we encounter every day, are older than we think and can be traced to this time and place. And so if you're curious about where civilization really began and you want to start with a short, smart, and a satisfying course, this is a great pick. Please let me know in the comments if you have any thoughts on this specific course or other great courses, or any other material that is related to the ancient Near East. Or if you're interested in deep dive history content, of course, check out my other channel, History Unraveled with Dr. Duncan. Don't know how many times I can say that. The link is in the description, and here, if I have not actually put that card up yet, but we'll see. And if you liked this review, please share it. That, of course, helps more people know about these reviews as well as my other channel. And don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and until next time, keep those pages turning.